Imagine being trained by the CIA to attack Cuba at the height of the Cold War, only to be left stranded on the shores of the Bay of Pigs. Well, that's exactly what happened to the men of the Brigada 2506 during that ill-fated Bay of Pigs invasion. So what happened to the prisoners? One of our channel viewers, RC59191, asked that question, and I thought it would be a great way to complete the story of the Bay of Pigs. If you haven't seen that video yet, check it out in the links below. But before we dive into that whole story and explanation, we have to go all the way back to World War II to introduce you to a U.S. Navy commander by the name of James Donovan. He would actually join the OSS, the precursor of the CIA, and would later rise to the role of general counsel, then as an attorney serving as an associate prosecutor throughout the Nuremberg trials and an international negotiator. These military appointments would be the foundation for the future roles he would play during the Cold War. After the war, Donovan would become a partner for the New York-based law offices of Waters and Donovan, which specialized in insurance law. Everything seemed normal until 1957. Donovan was approached by the Brooklyn Bar Association and asked to defend the accused Soviet spy, Colonel Rudolph Abel, after other attorneys supposedly refused. But I think it was due to his work at Nuremberg and the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, that he was actually chosen for this very delicate case. This Cold War trial was retold in the 2015 Tom Hanks film, Bridge of Spies. Colonel Abel would ultimately be convicted at trial, and Donovan would appeal the case all the way up to the Supreme Court, which would ultimately reject it. Abel was facing a death penalty at that time, the same penalty given to the Soviet spies Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Yet Donovan used his great skills at negotiation to get Abel an extended sentence instead. I wonder if this was also some type of CIA orchestrated maneuver, as there would be many spy swaps throughout the Cold War. So do you think Commander Donovan ever left the intel services? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so bear with me, we're almost at the Bay of Pigs story. Donovan would of course be tapped by the US government and the CIA to lead the prisoner exchange between Abel and American CIA U-2 spy pilot Gary Powers in 1962. And this prisoner exchange would take place on the 10th of February 1962 at the Glienicke Bridge between Colonel Abel and Gary Powers, along with an American student, Frederick Pryor. Donovan's ability to get this 2-for-1 prisoner swap would not be forgotten or unnoticed, and in June of 1962, a Cuban exile by the name of Pablo Perez Cisneros visited James Donovan in New York. That meeting had been arranged by Robert W. Keene, the son of a former congressman who happened to be the brother-in-law of Joaquin Silverio, a jailed member of the Brigada 2506. It just goes to show that it pays to have connections. Now, JFK had given the Cuban families the green light to negotiate the release of the Bay of Pigs prisoners on their own, and a committee was formed called the Families Committee, which Perez Cisneros was a coordinator. But getting back to our story, 2 months after the meeting in New York, Donovan would make the first of 11 trips to Cuba from May to December of 1962 to negotiate the release of 1,113 Bay of Pigs prisoners from Cuban prisons. And this is where the story gets even weirder. According to the book After the Bay of Pigs by Pablo Perez Cisneros, the CIA even tried to use James Donovan to deliver a lethal gift to Fidel Castro during the negotiations. If you're interested, check out that book for more insight on that. It's pretty interesting. On one of the trips to Cuba, Donovan would even take his teenage son to meet Fidel Castro, who then arranged a fishing trip to his favorite place in Cuba, the Bay of Pigs. But during these negotiations, something else happened that kind of put a pause to things. The October Missile Crisis, also known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Was Fidel Castro using the backdrop of these negotiations to distract the U.S. while he armed the island with Soviet missiles? Undeterred, Donovan persisted, perhaps aware after the October Missile Crisis was over that the prisoners of the Brigada 2506 would be in greater danger. Now, the U.S. government could not be seen as directly negotiating the release of these prisoners, and so by mid-December, Donovan and Castro had agreed to a prisoner exchange which amounted to $53 million in food, medicine, and medical equipment to be supplied as humanitarian donations by 157 American companies. On the 23rd of December 1962, the first 5 planes left Cuba for Miami, carrying 484 members of the brigade. The next day, the rest of the 719 prisoners were flown out. But Donovan was not done. He would continue negotiations with Castro, and on the 3rd of July 1963, he had successfully negotiated the further release of 9,703 men, women, and children from Cuban detention. Sadly, James Donovan would pass away at the early age of 53 from a heart attack. The film Bridge of Spies captures the public's reactions to the spy case and the prisoner swap. One can only imagine that the immense stress and pressure that he suffered from the moment he took on the Soviet spy case to the negotiations directly with Fidel Castro would have taken a heavy toll on his health. Most of the released prisoners from the Brigada 2506 would transition to a civilian life, while some would continue to work with the CIA or join the military. One such figure, Felix Rodriguez, would go on to hunt down and capture Che Guevara in the deep jungles of Bolivia in 1967, and then fly over 300 missions during the Vietnam War. Still, others would find work or start their own businesses and families. Some of these men are still with us today. If you ever get a chance to visit Miami, go ahead and stop by the Brigada 2506 Museum.